Good day, everyone, and welcome back to our second day of the Norman Manley Law School's Legal Aid Clinic annual Legal Aid Fair. We do apologize for the delayed resumption of our live stream to our YouTube audience, as we had some technical difficulties earlier today that prevented us from starting at our scheduled time. Notwithstanding that, we are pleased to continue with the thrust of today's theme, treating with cooperatives and how cooperatives can help us to chart a sustainable future or treat with sustainable development moving forward. Our first presentation for the day treated with the theme of one hand can clap, which is important as we look towards recovery. Ms. Rodriguez is a second year law student hailing from Belize in the Caribbean archipelago, in the Central America, and our Dr. Gregory Roberts hails or joins us today from the United Kingdom. Ms. Rodriguez?
Good morning. Dr. Gregory John Roberts, PhD, is a strategic advisor, cooperative development specialist, and inclusive economics practitioner working across the United Kingdom, the Caribbean, and the wider African diaspora. He is the founder of Straight J Global Consulting Limited and Knowledge Production Limited, through which he advises government, businesses, charities, social enterprises, and community-based organizations on strategy, governance, impact evaluation, and sustainable enterprise development. His work integrates academic research with practical implementation, with particular expertise in cooperative governance, community wealth building, and cross-cultural economic collaboration. Dr. Roberts has served as a consultant on the Caribbean creative economy and has supported national funded organizations, charities, and faith-based institutions with program evaluation, strategic planning, and organizational development. He is especially known for designing innovative cooperatives and hybrid business models that combine commercial viability with social impact, including work in renewable energy resilience, health services, and diaspora-linked trade. His approach blends rigorous financial modeling, policy insight, and culturally grounded engagement to deliver sustainable, scalable solutions. Alongside his consultancy work, Dr. Roberts contributes to board and community initiatives focused on knowledge equity, cooperative collaboration, and economic inclusion. He speaks internationally on cooperatives, sustainability, and development finance, and is committed to strengthening partnerships between Africa, the Caribbean, and the diaspora to critical system level solution. He currently serves as the chair of the steering committee of Jamaica Energy Resilience Cooperative, the Caribbean First Consumer Energy Cooperative, Secretary/Trustee of the Boabab Community Fund in the UK. He is a graduate of Salisis Mona, where he served as the president of the guild and designed and launched the guild system in 1994. He subsequently studied entrepreneurship and theology at the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom.
So we thank Ms. Rodriguez for that introduction. Dr. Robert, you may go ahead.
I am happy to join you and to be part of this very interesting week of presentations and discussions. It's quite topical to talk about the cooperative movement and cooperatives do. And I am particularly pleased to do so to my country and the university up until July during a very pivotal part of my life. Cooperatives as tools of sustainability. Implies to me that cooperatives must deliver, particularly on the sustainable development goals which were established a couple of decades ago by the UN. The colleague of mine often says, whatever the problem is, there is a cooperative solution. And in talking to the theme of your week's work, we must take the approach that sustainability requires a certain legal architecture in order to be effective. Where this legal architecture determines what the rights of individuals, generally the allocation of rights, the allocation of risk, and the allocation of responsibility. This framework would decide who owns what, how natural resources are controlled or accessed, who will capture the economic value of natural resources, and who has risk, including climate risk. It has been settled that the Canadian suffers disproportionately from the problems of climate change and so on. And it's unfortunate because we haven't been the ones largely affected or the changes of disturbances that we come to experience. And the Hurricane Melissa gave us a stinging lesson as to where we stand and the extent to which the Caribbean and Jamaica is vulnerable in this concept. In terms of cooperatives, most of us would have met cooperatives along the way. Caribbean has a number of very strong cooperatives, most of which are credit unions. Unions are very strong in Jamaica, and that's known all across the world. Cooperatives are associations which are autonomous and voluntary, and its purpose is to meet common economic interests. Emphasize ownership and democratic control such that there's a one man on one vote rule. They also put services and the delivery of services above mere profit maximization. The mutual accountability that is required of cooperatives and by cooperatives lends itself to deepen democracy within communities and countries in a way that is generally accepted as progressive. When we speak of sustainability, we're referring to the capacity of legal, economic, and ecological systems to endure across generations without depleting the capital. And this capital could be natural capital or ecological capital. It could be financial capital. It could also be social capital. Across the various dimensions, we know now that there's the need for legal durability or sustainability itself collapses. To zero in on the Caribbean, and particularly looking on the laws that underpin the sector and the movement in the Caribbean, we find that they are largely modeled on the British colonial legislative structure. So co-op societies across the Caribbean focus more on fisheries, agriculture, and access to credit. And so now in the UK, the legal framework has moved on beyond what was found in the 1950s and so on, when, for example, Jamaica's cooperative society laws were promulgated. One of the telling things about the cooperative movement and the cooperative societies across the Caribbean is the extent to which the oversight powers incorporated in the role of the registrar, in the office of the registrar, is also running in tandem, not simply in terms of, in unison of purpose, but also in terms of being located in the same office and the same individual as the promotion of cooperatives. So, for example, the Department for Cooperatives and for Friendly Societies in Jamaica, and in particular the registrar, the office of the registrar, is responsible for the promotion of cooperatives, expanding the number of cooperatives, as well as training cooperatives, and also oversight for how cooperatives function, how individual cooperatives abide by the rules, and so on. And this is the same across the Caribbean. But this is fraught with tension because in many ways, it is noticeable that this can lead to a conflict of interest. And I zero in on this because it might provide for an interesting and fertile ground for students of law to look into. And as I've said, this is common across the Caribbean. The only country in the Caribbean that has moved to make any kind of reform changes to this situation is Guyana. Guyana, which since 1970 is rightfully titled the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. We also find that the situation where both the oversight of the sector as well as the promotion of cooperatives are situated in the same person runs foul of the principles of the separation of functions that's advocated by the International Organization for Standardization. So ISO/IEC 17020 rules advocate against this kind of situation. I'm particularly zeroing on this because we want to move the functionality of the sector onto a strong modern footing so that the sector can respond to many of the threats to sustainability which exist in the Caribbean and in Jamaica in particular. Of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, just about every single one of them can be served by the cooperative principles. And this isn't an idle position. But as you look through them, you see where there are strong cooperatives, there will be increased equality. There will be a move towards reducing hunger, improving access to employment, improving those things that will give rise to better environmental standards, and so on. But one of the things that I've found quite interesting and would like to just spend a few short minutes to speak to is that of the place of energy. Across the Caribbean, we have arguably the highest rates of electricity. The cost of electricity is quite high in Jamaica, Barbados, St. Lucia. Trinidad is the only country that could boast, some lower or acceptable levels in the price of electricity. We find running with that dependence on imported oil and oil products, whether it's going to be or similar fuel to LNG and so on. And this within itself, as we now know, having seen the rapid rise in the price of oil globally as a result of the conflict currently in the Middle East, this gives rise to very high cost being sent through to the final consumer. Where in Jamaica, some 60% of the price of electricity, one could argue, is not quite related to the amount of kilowatt hours that the household uses. Yet there's a struggle for the adoption of renewables. The Caribbean Development Bank lamented that they are unable to find any solution that will result in the take-up of renewables at scale and at speed that would make a difference to people's lives and to the economies. So this limited adaptation to renewable energy, to climate infrastructure, and to digital platforms by the cooperative sector is something that demands serious address and very fast. I'll quickly add that it has been my pleasure to start the chairing of a steering committee to look at addressing some of these, particularly to find a way to move and deploy solar systems across households and businesses at scale and at speed that will make a difference in the economies across the Caribbean. And in this, we employ a cooperative model that draws in a very modern way on other features which are available in current economies, so that we do not run foul of the law, particularly the Electricity Act of 2015 that gives monopoly status in selling and distribution and transmission to JPSCO in the case of Jamaica, but rather innovatively draw on the wisdom that is available. We know now that there is no need for greater technologies to solve some of the problems that we have in the Caribbean, particularly problems which affect sustainability. It is simply to change some of the institutional settings and some of the governance orientation that have been dogging us for many, many decades. I've welcomed this opportunity with the hope that it might not enrage, but engage the minds of legal scholars, attorneys in waiting, to address some of these issues that just call for a certain degree of innovation, thinking outside of the box, not being afraid to call out the white elephants and the dinosaurs that sometimes prevent the engagement, employment, and deployment of methodologies that can serve us all. And so when we particularly look on land and the sustainability issues presented by land in the context of the Caribbean, there is insecurity of tenure. We have agricultural vulnerability and hence vulnerability in livelihoods based on land and access to land. We have water rights presenting all kinds of issues where there are places where people simply cannot get access to water. I've heard that a stream, or rather a spring, where I grew up in St. Mary is no longer accessible because someone bought the land that the spring is on. And despite the fact that it has been the source of water for the last 300 years for a community, the owner simply wired off access to the property and no one can get access to that spring. These are issues that might engage the minds of our legal students to look to say where else things like these might be happening and how can we address these issues, especially as it is the poor in our countries who are affected the most by these. With regards to land, there's an issue with climate resilient planning because it's simply absent. Decisions are made that affect the people who are directly on lands, and these decisions are made without reference to the needs of these people. But there can be cooperative solutions to these. In the 1970s, a number of things were done. In fact, from the 1950s, there were attempts to aggregate land and to make large tracts of land available to people utilizing common approaches. So land lease notions, large tracts of land which were given up by sugar companies in, say, Westmoreland or Clarendon in the 1970s were made available to cooperatives. Sadly, based on the research done by Dr. Stanbury, Donovan Stanbury, your own Donovan Stanbury, the issue was not because these were cooperatives that gave rise to a lack of success, but rather because the economies of scale, which might have related to land, simply couldn't work because they lacked the capital, including access to machinery on the plains of Clarendon and so on. So the individuals, the poor families were never able to produce, and these lands just went into ruination. There is also the possibility to utilize cooperatives to increase agri-value chains. And the results and the rewards that could be generated from these in agro-processing, in bringing greater value to raw material so that families and communities will see the results of their hard labor rather than having the raw crops posted to someone somewhere, whether in England or in America or in Kingston, and they simply get 20% of the value of their hard labor, leading to poverty and serious loss of livelihood. There is the possibility for us to use community land trust or land banks, even in semi-urban areas, to ensure that people who are usually disenfranchised as the value of land increase are able to have some stability in where they live, in where they would like to make their living. Consistent with your theme of looking on, say, the sea, the blue economy has been a feature of approaches to Caribbean development in maybe the last 15 years. And there is this issue of coastal justice to which a cooperative approach can provide solutions. We have challenges around fisheries governance, marine resource depletion, tourism versus local access, and the tensions which are often brought into play on these issues, coastal erosion and climate loss directly affecting coastal communities and communities that are dependent on these economies. We see that cooperatives can help. Fishery cooperatives have been effective across the world. And not only in the traditional notion of fishermen co-op as we might have it in Kingston, but also in terms of diversifying income, whether it will be farming the sea or drawing on the natural resource, the sand, the sunshine, a particular mode of which is utilized by the Half Moon Bay Cooperative in Helsha. Most of you would enjoy Helsha without realizing that it's actually run by a cooperative, a very effective cooperative that has been able to make tremendous strides in battling the erosion of the seashore while diversifying their income through entertainment and presenting cuisine. And this is now globally known. Cooperatives could also be used to address the high cost of cold storage. And this might relate to both coastal communities and fishers co-op, as well as the farming communities. The stewardship of the marine environment, close shores, near shore areas, as well as coastal areas, can be easily achieved using cooperatives, knowing that there is this common bond in the push for economic empowerment. A push that would not only bring social cohesion, but also increase community resilience, increase the speed at which communities could respond to natural disasters, to social breakdown, to needing to address issues of families and individuals which will arise quite frequently. In looking on air, we inevitably talk about emissions. And in broadly speaking, we might refer to emissions, in terms of carbon dioxide emissions. And there are ways to address this. We know that a large portion of Jamaica's electricity is generated from the burning of hydrocarbons. We can employ renewables. We can increase the rate at which renewables are brought onto market and into the grid. It calls for institutional design. It calls for a different way, as I've said before, at looking at the problem and addressing it with hope. Cooperatives traditionally have been a bringer of hope to situations. We need to draw on some of the things that made our ancestors strong, that brought people together to address issues which were particularly against them. So we're asking for more energy, for example. We're asking for addressing issues around emissions. Can we get cooperatives to be more involved in tourism across the Caribbean? Not just in the sense of community tourism, but also what of other tourism players, small hotels coming together to form cooperatives so that they can buy in bulk, as it were, lower the cost of their providing services and increase the level of their productivity and profits in such ways that will ensure jobs are available, and jobs are not just available, but jobs are paying people a living wage and increasing their chances of economic empowerment. And so the governance issues which inevitably come to the fore include the extent to which cooperatives bring into play the legitimacy of communities, capital discipline, where the focus is not just on capital being employed to maximize profits, but also to increase jobs and to protect the environment. There needs to be regulatory clarity in all the sectors where cooperatives can be engaged, where cooperatives and the strength of cooperatives can be brought to bear. So the future may very well lie in the direction of looking at how assets are owned, encouraging communities to own assets, communities to raise funds in more innovative ways, ways that are probably engaged by the typical profit maximizing firms. Cooperatives ought to look at how they can find innovative ways of raising capital. The need for cooperative oversight is also coming out strongly. And the time, I believe, is now for us to look across the Caribbean at the function of registrars. The extent to which there is the perception of political risks is minimized, and we look more on people and how cooperatives can empower people rather than continue, as it sometimes appears, to protect the powerful by restricting cooperatives to one part of the economy and the rest of the economy continues seeing whatever growth, whatever empowerment, whatever levels of inclusion that we have always had. Cooperatives can be instruments of inclusion. By definition, cooperatives are inclusive. We need for a broad-based approach to solving the problems in the Caribbean. We need to let everyone feel like they have got a stake in what is going on. It's hard for me to say that despite the extent to which cooperatives were brought into play in the Caribbean across the globe to address elitism, in most countries, cooperatives have now become, elitist. Those who have access to the powers of cooperatives keep control. And the individual member hardly ever get a chance to raise their hand during AGMs and to have a say in how decisions are made and the direction that their own cooperatives take. These are governance issues that I believe it is quite fitting for us to address as we look at sustainability and how cooperatives can help to achieve the various sustainable development goals. Thank you.
It has been an honor to be a part of this wonderful event. On behalf of the Norman Mandel Clinic, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed guest, Dr. Robert, who graciously shared vast knowledge on cooperative development and movement, not only within Jamaica, but also in the wider Caribbean. Your insights were both enlightening and inspiring. Learning is always a valuable experience, and I'm confident that each of us gains something meaningful from today's presentation. Once again, we sincerely thank you for a job well done.